Well, this is a Confessions podcast. Thank you very much indeed for downloading the latest audio array of sin from the sinniest Radio 2 listeners of all time. So this week we have a duplicitous disciplinarian difficulty. Nice. A blatant backhand buffoonery. Nice. Pesky pigeon poo and Teddy's taking tea. Nicely done. Drive Time Confession. Tonight's comes from Charlie and Charlie I.E., so female Charlie. Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective. Let's go back to 1985. I was a young, free and single kind of person and loving the sixth form at a boys' school, getting loads of attention, eating lots of toast, avoiding doing any serious work and basically wasting all my parents' money. I had the most fabulous roommate, who we will call Mary, and she remains a fabulous friend. She was the girl who transformed me from a rather square, overprotected 16-year-old into a more daring risk-taker, let's sneak out at midnight to meet the boys kind of girl. You know girls like this, Rebecca?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this an all-boys school?
She's a girl at an all-boys school.
She's a girl, I imagine, let's say, it's probably an all-boys school, but in the sixth form it was probably mixed.
Oh, right, I'm with you now.
There you go.
That's what I'm saying.
They weren't listening.
And it's boarding,
Slightly,
I would think. So
thrown
that's
there.
why
Well done.
she's not the only girl
At an
at an all-boys boarding school.
Okay.
That's probably not right.
That would have been a story in itself.
However, we also got up to the normal innocent boarding school capers, such as hot chocolate late at night, crumpets toasted on the electric fire in our room, and gossiping late into the night all about the boys we wanted to kiss. Was this like your school?
Yeah.
Is this like your school? Our housemaster was a very kind, good man, although a rather unfortunate nickname of Pig, due to his rather unruly nasal and earlobe hairs that for the life of me were never trimmed. It is to Pig that I owe this apology, and who I would like to make my last confession. Every night, we had to be back in our house by 10 p.m. After a 2-hour prep session and an hour to go and socialise, we were checked in by Pig, or sometimes Mrs. Pig, who used to ply us with flapjacks as a bribe to get us into bed as soon as possible so that she could get back to the warmth of her own house or sty with Mr. Pig. On the night in question, Mary very clearly told me that there would be no check-in as the pigs were away. So I didn't need to come back after my hours socialising with a particular boy, who I like to kiss, in the dark field below our house. What a lovely free feeling it was to be giggling and snogging together late at night, knowing that we didn't have to rush back.
Don't ask me. Don't ask me whether it was like that.
Oh, I see.
I think it was.
I'm not saying anything.
What was his
Nothing.
name?
Stop.
Okay. While we were whispering, if you're listening at home and Rebecca's your mum, none of this is true. It's nothing to do with her. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes, true.
Okay. While we were whispering sweet nothings, says Charlie, I do recall hearing some rather distinctive owl hoots in the silence of the night and thinking it sounded rather like a warning sound that Mary might use to get me home, but I dismissed it immediately as I thought my imagination was running away with me. But on return, in capital letters, all hell had let loose. Mary had actually been owl hooting me, as we did have a check-in after all, and Pig was on the warpath. She told me that she'd panicked slightly and told him that my auntie had died. And I was very sad, so I'd had to go for a walk because I was so miserable. Oh my goodness, was my first thought. Which auntie had died and what did she die from? We had to come up with a plan very quickly, and as Mrs. Pig was due back upstairs to the study bedrooms any moment, Mary told me to get into bed and to rub my eyes really hard and get the story straight to get the maximum sympathy and forgiveness, and maybe it would end with some flapjack and hot chocolate. Footsteps on the stairs alerted us to her arrival. Mary sat on my bed pretending to comfort me, but in the split second that the door opened, I realised that Mary had also got ready for bed but hadn't quite made it into pyjamas and was sitting next to me in just her underwear. The second the door opened, it wasn't Mrs. Pig but Mr. Pig himself.
Oh dear.
Then a number of things happened. 1, Mr. Pig looked very embarrassed. 2, I announced that it was my Auntie Alice who had died of diphtheria and bloating. The first words that came to mind. Well, you wouldn't want that combined, would you?
Death by bloating.
Diphtheria and bloating.
Yeah.
3, Mr. Pig flustered and blustered and said he'd see us first thing in the morning and then backed out of the room at the speed of light. Knowing what a Good, kind, upright Christian man he was, as an adult I do feel extremely guilty about putting him through such an embarrassing moment, about lying to him about dead relations, for pretending to be in mourning for my aunt, and for snogging after hours. Mostly for bringing disrepute, his words later the next day, to the house and the school, and for generally being an irresponsible sixth former and letting everyone down, mostly myself, of course. Did anyone say that to you, Rebecca?
I'm not commenting. It's got
Okay.
nothing to do with me.
No.
I don't know why you're trying to make it about me.
Anyway, phew, lucky for me, my parents never found out. Mary still remains a lovely friend who laughs at the same jokes, and if I were to tell my own 17-year-old daughter now of how Mary made me order pizza at midnight and climb out of the window to pay the pizza man, then maybe she wouldn't see me in such a middle-aged light. Anyway, I seek forgiveness from Pig, Mrs. Pig, and if the collective would be able to forgive, I might just have to celebrate with a tray bake of flapjacks. Excellent idea. It's another boarding school caper, and who better to judge than Sister Rebecca?
Wow. Well, Mary was really watching her back. Well, she was a kind of effective operator, wasn't she?
Very
Get
good.
the story right, rub your eyes, pretend you were crying. The thing is, I would never tempt fate about saying a relative had died because I would just be too worried that it would, make it more likely to happen. But I guess that wasn't Charlie's fault. That was Mary's suggestion. But I think, really, what struck me is that Mr. Pig should not be going into girls' dormitories.
Well,
at
I
night,
think there was a thing on. He was on the warpath.
So, okay, maybe on the warpath, but I don't think it justifies it. So I'm going to forgive Charlie for that.
Let's see what Sister Bobby from the Priory makes of all
It's
that.
such an innocent story, isn't it, really? Way back then.
I do like as Rebecca said, I
Snogging,
like the idea
hot
of Mary
chocolate, flapjacks.
hooting like an owl to warn her, yes.
Come on. It's such a lovely, lovely story. Poor man, he must have been mortified and so embarrassed. I imagine he went back in the room with his wife and went, I cannot believe what I've just seen. And they would have looked at each other and laughed and gone, you're in big trouble now. Of course, do you know what? You're forgiven. It is such a great way of kind of getting out of the problem. Actually, what happened next morning? What happened next morning when he went, so which
Well, he
auntie
got
died?
across then.
And
Anyway,
did he not believe it? Anyway, I think you're forgiven. I love these stories of innocence at school, and it's not Rebecca's story, by the way.
no,
Thank you.
though it sounds as though it might be quite close. I reckon some boarding school confessions. Have a few
Yeah.
of those.
No, this
Ordering
is-
pizza at midnight. What do you think?
Wow, crazy days. And flapjacks and hot chocolate at night. Who knows what we'll get up to? It's right in the middle of Hogwarts, this, isn't it? It's all that kind of stuff. Not really my thing. I find it a bit odd, this owl hooting nonsense. I don't see how that works as a code for come back. Because someone's coming into the room, you need to get your hands off the boyfriend, kind of thing. So I am not going to forgive purely because the owl hooting doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's quite a good way of
Well, it's
warning,
not
isn't it?
because there are owls. So you don't have a code where it's going to be the same noise as you would hear at that time anyway. It should have been a different kind of noise, and for that you are not forgiven.
Thank you, Bob, for tonight's confession. Dear Simon and the ecumenical entourage. With Wimbledon fortnight upon us, I thought it appropriate to impart a humorous encounter I had in New York in 2008.
Okay.
All right.
Is that one again?
Where I was celebrating 25 years of mostly wedded bliss to my darling wife, Jenny. Our trip was in August and coincided with the US Open Tennis Championships at Queen's. The hotel where we were staying, which was close to the Waldorf, obviously had some connection with the competition as it was heavily adorned with tennis paraphernalia, and many of the guests were sporting tracksuits and tennis rackets. Many really shouldn't have bothered. I know the kind. One evening I was waiting for Jenny in the bar and I struck up a conversation with an American couple, Randy and Denise. Say there!
Yeah.
Was that a little bit effeminate?
No, that was very American.
Say, hey you. You here for the tennis? Said the husband in a southern drawl. Helpful.
Yeah.
Why, yes, I am, I replied, and for some reason, which I still cannot fathom, I continued, I'm actually Andy Murray's backhand coach.
Right.
Gee, says the Yank incredulously. This is Randy. Wowzer, his backhand coach?
Wowzer. Okay.
Wowzer. They say that in New York.
No, they don't.
Well, I couldn't back down now. Yes, I said, I'm just part of a massive support team. Like all the professionals, Andy has a massive team to help him through every aspect of his game. He has a serving coach and a volley coach and a half volley coach and a rally coach and a baseline coach, a drop shot coach, a lobbing coach, physiotherapists, psychologists, media coaches, a dresser, a masseuse, hairstylist. Wow. Wowzer indeed. So, says Randy, what's the secret of a good backhand? Well, with you being a backhand coach and all. I laughed knowingly. I could tell you, but then I'd have to charge you a lot of money, and I'm very, very expensive, so I'm so sorry. That was quite patronising. Anyway, the conversation went on for about 5 minutes more before the couple got up and parted by saying, wow, well, I never realised the players, I've squandered slightly, never realised that players needed so much backup. Well, we got to go now, but you give Andy Murray our best. Whenever we see Andy on TV...
You come back now, y'all.
Gone to Georgia. I'll think of you when he lets a backhand fly. We'll say, way to go, Bob. Anyway,
You ain't gone with the wind.
Fan my brow.
I'm wandering around. It's like a little geography trip, this one. Next morning we bumped into the man again in reception with some other tennis types. Oh, hi, Bob. Oh, hi, Randy, I said. Say, come and meet the chair of the Queen's Committee. I've been telling him all about you. Oh, dear. Anyway, needless to say, I had to go to the John and stay there an awful long time, and I never saw any of them ever again. A couple of years later, we were at home watching Andy in his first Grand Slam in the US Open, and I said to the lovely Jenny, what if that couple I met in New York are at home watching this and saying, I like to think we spent some time with his backhand coach. Which actually sounds a bit weird now I've said it like that. Anyway, I couldn't resist the temptation of exploring quite how gullible our friends across the pond could be. I don't know if I'm going to get some forgiveness. Given the same opportunity, I'd probably do it all again. Anyway, way to go, and that's from Bob. Thank you, Bob. Way to go, Bob. Anyway.
That was really good. I was in a different place for
Were
a
you?
while there. Yeah,
I was
it
just
was kind of,
taking in a whole variety of
Southern
American,
America,
Central America,
dusty plains,
New York,
Wales.
Yeah. I think that Bob sounded really plausible, actually. And he was listing off all those different shots and different coaches and everything.
He probably
I
does
think
have a
I would
lot.
have believed him.
Do you think?
So I think, people always think the Americans are really gullible, but I think in this case, most people would have probably believed him. I mean, if you don't know that people, don't have backhand coaches, I mean, maybe they do. It is plausible, isn't it?
And when Andy wins a point, there is a big group of people that leap up in the...
It could all be
in
the
remote-
coaches,
so they
couldn't it?
could-
Yeah,
It could be the
that's
backhand coach and the half-volley coach and the baseline coach.
I'm going to forgive.
All right.
Sorry, I'm not going to forgive because I think the American wasn't that gullible.
So you're not going to forgive?
No.
Right, okay, thanks for the clarification. Bobby, what are you saying now?
Well, first of all, I think things like this are great fun as long as you're not trying to achieve anything. And he wasn't after anything, was he?
No.
He just thought, see if I can get away with it. And let's face it, the only person really he was risking with himself, he was going to be the biggest fool if the guy had said, no, you're not. Because I think what's lovely about this is the Americans being genuine enough to go, you know what? You could be. Why shouldn't you be? And not being cynical enough to think it wasn't true. If he'd have said that back home, back in the UK, someone would have said, no, you're not, you idiot. I don't believe you. So I think I'm going to forgive you, if only if it highlights the positivity of the American and actually
Is
no
that
harm
right?
done.
Yeah, be positive, man.
Quite
Come on,
right too.
yeah,
Well
absolutely.
said,
What
Bob
are you
said.
saying?
Before we get emails, obviously the US Open takes place at Flushing Meadows as opposed to Queen's, but obviously, because I'll be the one that gets all the emails.
It's your fault.
Because it'll all be my fault. What I love about this is that he gives him the opportunity to see that he might be bluffing by saying there's also a coach for this and a coach for this and a coach for this. And I think when you got to like the seventh coach, a regular person would have turned around and said, actually, I don't think there's that many coaches. So that's why I love this confession, and that's why I'm going to forgive.
Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Matt in Cheltenham, why is Penelope Pitstop reading the confession today? That's not nothing like that. Gather round, here comes another dry time confession. This is from Ted. Ted, thanks very much indeed. Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective. I seek forgiveness for something that happened whilst on holiday in Italy some years ago. By the way, almost all of them that are coming in at the moment do require a certain accent and a certain degree of acting from me.
Because everyone wants it.
Not,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
not
yeah,
this
yeah.
one.
Oh.
I was
Really?
so exhausted after yesterday. So exhausted. I couldn't. I mean, there was an Italian, but I think I might have changed this. But anyway, my significant other and I decided we would book ourselves into a villa in Tuscany, actually part of an old farmhouse. From here, we could access many beautiful parts of Italy via car and train. One day, we decided we'd take a trip to San Gip, a famous town. Gimignano, thank you. Whereabouts is that?
It's in Tuscany.
It's in, well, I know that, but more specifically.
That would be my guess.
Kind of near Siena.
There you go.
Or Lucca.
That's what I wanted. I think you're half Italian. Okay. there we were, famous for its medieval architecture and white wine. I do like architecture, but I do like white wine even more. When we arrived, we saw plenty of other tourists, but not that many to make it feel overwhelming. So we spent our time wandering around, checking out all the nooks and crannies of this beautiful town, taking pictures along the way. After being there a couple of hours, we decided that we would take a break for some lunch. There were plenty of eateries, but we came across one in a square next to a church. It was very picturesque. There were tables outside, a number of other diners, both in and outside of the restaurant, and various people milling around the church. Noting a table had become vacant, we duly sat down and perused the menu. There were many dishes available. We decided on a sandwich and a glass of white wine. I'm sure that went down very well. As we were eating, I noticed 2 pigeons hopping between the tables and dropped a couple of crumbs on the floor. They duly hopped over and proceeded to eat the said crumbs. As I carried on eating, I began to pick crumbs off my sandwich and pop them into my serviette. After we'd both finished eating, I picked up my serviette and put all the crumbs into my hand. I had a good handful. As I walked away, I threw the crumbs that I'd saved onto the floor towards the church in a sort of arc for the 2 pigeons that had been hopping around the tables. Well, never in my wildest dreams did I expect what happened next. In a millisecond, it was as though some sentient being had awoken. The whole of the square suddenly went dark, and literally thousands and thousands of pigeons descended en masse from out of nowhere. They moved as one, like a swooping, billowing cloak towards the crumbs that I'd just thrown on the floor. No sounds, just the whoosh of their evil little wings. At first, I didn't think anyone realised what was happening. I heard a few squeaks from some of the diners eating outside, then a yell or two, which then suddenly turned into shrieks of horror as the massive wave of foul pigeons came down from the skies, landing anywhere and everywhere like a moving carpet. They completely covered the square. Once they had descended, the sound was deafening from birds and people alike. People were jumping up from the tables, shouting and screaming and running inside the restaurant. Chairs were crashing to the floor. Food was left in situ. Bit of a weekend to the sentence there. The people who were walking in the square had nowhere to go and tried to find cover, yelling and screaming as they ran, the pigeons having done a poop and swoop manoeuvre as they came in for the crumbs. It was a total and complete mess. All the diners, including the waitresses in the restaurants, were looking out of the window in stunned amazement as the picture unfolded in front of their eyes. Bird poo was absolutely everywhere. It was as though someone had thrown pots of white and grey paint all over the place. It reminded me of a Benny Hill sketch, but with a horror twist. The whole incident lasted no more than 30 seconds, but seeing the carnage unfold, we walked off rather sharpish, still hearing the yelling and screaming of people as we did. Sounds like they're all dying. Anyway, after we'd put enough distance between us and the restaurant, we decided that we'd probably seen everything we wanted to see and it was time to leave. I would have gone back and apologised, but I don't think I'd have been very popular after what had happened, especially as the whole thing, the whole place, the whole square was coated with you know what. So, Father Simon, I would like to apologise to all of the people in the town of... Rebecca, help me out.
You can say it.
San Gimignano.
Yeah, fine.
In Tuscany, famous for its architecture and white wine. Apologise to everybody there. The diners, the sightseers, the waitresses, anyone that actually lost their food, either via the pigeons or by being sick, and anyone else who had to clear up the mess left behind because the carnage caused by the penguins was entirely my fault.
The penguins?
Oh, sorry.
Good Lord.
Penguins as well. What are they doing in Italy?
Have you not read about that?
Thousands of penguins.
Tuscan penguins.
Look, a lot of people travel a long way to see the Tuscan penguins. I'll have you know. Who'd have thought? Penguins, and then puffins.
That was like a scene from a Hitchcock film, and then it turned into Happy Feet at the end.
Just a little bit. I was just trying to make it like a happy ending.
Yeah, okay. Well, you did. I think those pigeons had obviously been fed before, because they were up there waiting for somebody.
Stop the pigeon! 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 Ow!
How? Anyway, yeah.
Well, you know, as you said, literally thousands of
Literally
them
millions.
swooped on these bits of breadcrumb. So I think obviously they were there. They were used to being fed, and he wasn't the first. So, and he didn't know, and there were presumably no signs saying don't feed the pigeons, or maybe he just didn't understand them.
Yes.
So I'm going to forgive.
I also like the fact that, like a swooping, billowing cloak, they moved as one. I thought that was pretty poetic, Ted, actually. What do you think, Sister Bobby?
Well, it's like an unintentional feeding of the 5,000, isn't it, really? You go to feed a few and it all happens. The thing is, it was such an accident. What she's not responsible for, what Ted's not responsible for, is the reaction of the people sitting down. If they'd have just sat still, just covered their food, it wouldn't have been like it was. So the kind of furore and all the excitement is actually not their fault.
So you stay still because they're like...
Just sit still. Just stop.
T-Rex.
You know, it's a couple of pigeons landing
It's not a couple,
on your
it's
head.
1,000 and they're pooing all over. What, you're going to run for the hills?
Because I think they all overreacted and just got a bit silly. It really is. It's their fault, not your fault.
Those southern Mediterraneans, they just...
Your intentions were good. You were just putting a few crumbs to a couple of birds, and that's admirable. It's what we all do in the garden every year, isn't it?
Don't feed the pigeons.
Just because they're
pigeons. Don't feed the pigeons. Don't feed the pigeons. Don't feed the pigeons. Don't feed the pigeons.
Okay.
They're evil.
If you live near me,
evil.
feed the pigeons.
Evil
I think
pigeons.
it's not... You're forgiven because you were trying to do good. It's their
Throw a
responsibility.
towel over them and chuck them out. Brother Matthew.
Feed the birds.
Don't
Tuppence
feed
a
the
bag.
Yes.
Feed the birds.
Yes, Mary Poppins. What was she on about?
Yes, indeed. Why was he referring to them as evil little... He was the one who was throwing the bread out. No point taking double standards now, mate.
they
You're the one-
attacked.
Yes. Well, what do you expect
The
them to do?
exposed
They are
flesh of the
pigeons,
tourist.
Nature, red in tooth and claw. So for that, I am going to not forgive.
Because
Because of the nature, red in tooth and claw thing that I just thought of.
tonight's confession. This comes from Ted. There's another one from Ted. There's another Ted. How about that? Father Simon and the Benevolent Collective. I have to gear myself up a little bit, I'm afraid, for today.
Is it accents?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant.
The recent topic of gullible Americans has finally prompted me to send in an account of my own savage attack on the trusting nature of our colonial cousins, for which I seek forgiveness. It's November 2007. My wife and I travelled to Massachusetts with our then 6-year-old son. We flew into Boston and went straight to pick up our car hire, the SUV. Marvellous. The young female assistant persuaded me that it was worth paying a few dollars more for a sat-nav. This was to prove completely useless in Boston because almost all of the city's road system is underground. Anyway, we'd booked a hotel for one night before heading off across state to the Berkshires. Would it be the Berkshires? Berkshires. I know it's Berkshire here, but would they say...
I think Berkshire.
Okay.
I don't know, of course.
It's almost like being in the room with an American. So, you're an inspiration. On reaching said hotel, we realised that we had left my wife's suitcase at the car hire lot. So the next morning we had to drive back to retrieve it and got lost again. The same girl was behind the desk and asked me how the sat-nav was going. It's rubbish, I said. They don't work underground. We got lost and we drove for so long I ended up in the middle of New York City. The poor girl's shock turned to horror as, ashen-faced, she put her hands over her face. Oh, my God! I'm just joking, I said. Honestly, it's just a joke. Oh. Anyway, we left quickly, but I was thinking they might believe anything. We're here for 2 weeks. I wonder what fun can be had. Our accommodation for the rest of the trip was one of a cluster of comfortable pine lodges in a beautiful forested area. We were self-catering, but we could also go up to the main mess hall on the main campus. We could also collect meals from there and take them back to our lodge. So one night it was my turn to drive up the forest trail and collect our evening meal. It was 6 p.m. and the dining hall was packed with upwards of 350 people. I joined the queue at the hot buffet and started to shovel food into the various plastic containers that I had brought for the purpose. I was the only person doing this. Everyone else seemed to have plates. Anyway, so it wasn't long before I attracted the attention of a tall, square-jawed, square-framed American. Hey, you scooping up a lot of that food there, buddy, he said.
Because he just pulled him over for speeding. Yeah. Go on.
Overeating, actually.
Very good. Now, I had noticed that there were signs telling everyone to lock up their trash to discourage visits from black bears that live further up in the mountains. Well, yes, I replied. I'm with the Bears Are Beautiful project. You're with the what? I could tell he was intrigued, though not from the way I said, you're with the what? Yes, I continued, there's a group of us living up in the woods with the bears. We sit and eat with them in family groups, and we think that if we can teach bears table manners, you know, how to eat off plates and use knife and forks, then we can integrate them into society. And who knows, maybe they can then settle down and stop raiding the trash. Well, I thought I'd obviously gone a little bit too far because this was clearly ridiculous, but now the guy looked at me, all misty-eyed, and he reached out and he took me by the shoulder and he said, "Wow, that's beautiful, man." And to my horror, before I could tell him it wasn't true, he stood up on a table and turned to the assembled diners, remember, more than 300. He said, got them to quieten down. Hey! Quieten down. He said, Sounding a bit London.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, this guy is living up in the woods with the bears. He's teaching them that we're all on this planet together, that we have to get along. Isn't that so amazing?
Bears.
He's got a whole lot camper since he arrested him in the first place. Anyway, cue applause and whooping from the assembled Americans. Luckily, I could then scamper back to the SUV with all the grub and head off back down the trail, never to return to the dining hall for the rest of our stay. Never saw a bear, never taught it manners. But Simon and the crew, forgiveness please for making this stuff up for a poor trusting fellow, but particularly forgiveness from my wife, who I sent up the dark forest trail to get the food every night from then on because I was too frightened to go back in case I got questions about the Bears Are Beautiful project. And while I'm at it, I seek forgiveness for winding up the girl at the car hire office as well. But that was just a minor misdemeanour. But I think that's quite an impressive speech. He did the whole thing about living with bears, and he took it hook, line and sinker. Anyway, what do you think?
Do you know, I'm going to turn the tables on this because is Ted sure that he wasn't having his leg pulled by this guy? It's possible, isn't it, that the guy was pretending that he was being gullible and playing along with him, but actually he was taking the mickey out of Yeah, but
sorry.
not all of them are gullible. Can't, generalise like that. So I think there's nothing wrong with a bit of joshing on either side.
No.
So Ted is forgiven, as is this bloke who stood on the table and shouted to everyone.
Ted? And his mate, yeah, absolutely. What do you think then, Novice?
Well, initially, I thought, no, I can't forgive him because anyone who dines at 6 o'clock is not right, is it? It was far too early, isn't it?
Well, why?
I think it's too early.
Is that high? It could have been high tea.
In the mess room, all packed, because everyone, all Americans dine from about 4 o'clock.
But you've got young kids, you've got to eat at 6.
Even with young Ted, I think, well, anyway, I am going to forgive him now. I'll tell you why, because the evangelical Max Headroom, and who... I'd been taken by the hand and led away. He was taken by the shoulder, and then the man stood up and evangelised, didn't he? So
I've got no idea what he's talking about.
Well, he said that he was taken by the shoulder. The guy put his hands on his shoulders, didn't he? And he just absolutely. It was almost a evangelical moment, and for that, he must have thought, "What is going on?
Right,
praise the Lord."
That's beautiful, man.
It is beautiful.
I think it was more of a hippie moment, really, more than anything else. What do you think, there, Matthew?
Well done, Nige. I've got a theory on this, that I think when we do all of these confessions about Americans being taken in by English people telling them porkies, that it's the English accent, which, when you go to America, you see all the adverts are done with English accents when you're supposed to trust
them. They're just believable.
And I think that's why. I think that's why they're believing them. But however, Simon, I'm not. I think really after your week of accents in confessions, I think you will have no place to criticise Russell Crowe's accents in any movie ever, judging by what you've done this week.
That's true. And on Monday, next Monday, Imelda Staunton's coming in, who's starring in Gypsy in the West End in London. Her American accent is fantastic, so I'm going to get lessons.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. But are you forgiving or not?
Yeah, whatever.
They were this week's confessions, and very good too. Did it spark a bad thought, a dark secret in your soul? Confessions at bbc.co.uk, or you can go via the website. More in a week, and the Weekly Mayo available to download right now.